Good evening, everyone, fellow Delhi residents, people who are visiting. I think all of us have one thing in common, where we experience the daily choreography of garbage collection trucks making their way throughout the city. In fact, one of the things that connects us all today is the fact that all the waste that we generate is probably going to be operated at a waste to energy plant before making its way to a landfill, hopefully a scientific one. This is a common story. A city that already converts a significant amount of its waste to energy to relieve legacy landfills and power some of our households. And it's not really limited to Delhi. Other cities in the country, Mumbai, Pune, Indore, Hyderabad, all of them employ a part of this technology and mix it up with biomethanation, recycling, and waste to energy, like we discussed, to the fast-growing waste streams. Globally, metropolises like Tokyo, Singapore, Copenhagen, Paris also use high-efficiency waste-to-energy power plants as a part of the circular economy. The big question for us is, can we use this momentum to truly pivot from disposal to value regeneration? With that, let's dive in. Sunil, my first question for you is, how can India engineer a transition from a linear take, make, dispose model to a circular reduce, reuse, and recreate system that works for residents, businesses, and the environment alike?
Sure. Hi Nipun. Hi, everyone. The basic of any of this will revolve around having a framework in place, and that brings into account the policy, the regulations that has to be there. India has been doing a great job on the regulation front. We have had series of waste management regulations come in, whether it's the solid waste management regulations, whether it's the e-waste management, plastic waste management, talk of any waste, we do have the regulations in place. The challenge is implementing that. Most of these regulations have what we call the extended producer responsibility, where I, as a producer, if I am getting a battery in the market, it's my responsibility to ensure that the life cycle compliance, at the end of the product life cycle, we are able to regenerate, recycle the valuables out of it. So the first thing is always the policy and the regulations. So as I said, we do have a regulatory framework in place, but the challenge is in implementing the solid waste management regulations, which require you to segregate the wet waste, the dry waste, the domestic hazardous waste separately. So it's like the regulatory framework is in place. The second is creating education and awareness about that. And that's where, again, the challenge is. We as individuals, we need to be self-cognizant that, okay, if I'm generating my waste, what are my legal requirements? Obligations, I would say. Like we talk about our fundamental rights, we should also think about our fundamental duties. If I'm generating wet waste, do I mix it with the dry waste and send it across, or do I segregate and hand it over to the waste collector? So that's where the education and awareness is. I would just like to have a small. I come from a place called Patna. I've been visiting the place every year. And I've seen the change, I've seen a change where there used to be a heap of, dry, wet, mixed waste right across my house. And now when I visit, I see a small, minivan coming with a song, it's really tuning like, kachra wala hai, teri kachra utha, something of that nature. And that on a daily basis drives that, message amongst the waste generators. Oh, there is a van going to come. I don't need to throw it out. I need to give it to him. And, again, it goes to the education and awareness. It's like creating a conditioned reflex. If you go to biology, it's a conditioned reflex. Oh, this is my waste. I'm not going to throw. I'm going to wait for the van to come and give it to them. The second, the other thing is, and we talked about the business models, ensuring having a regulatory environment where if I get a television in the market, it's my responsibility to ensure its life cycle management. And then collaboration between the industry, government, and the academia. We have really bright scientists, so we need to collaborate, come up with ways. We cannot really, replicate the technologies that are there in the Western world, because with waste, any technology needs a very specific way of, managing that. Say, for example, the waste to energy, we'll talk about more into the design part. But we cannot really have, the waste characteristics are different. You don't have, the waste to energy, the key thing is about the calorific value. You can't have a mixed waste of, wet waste, dry waste going into waste to energy as because, the waste characteristics are different. So these are the strategies. If we collaborate with the academia, we have those incubators in various institutes where we can look at the India-specific waste and look at indigenous technologies, not really importing technologies from Western world and trying to replicate here. There have been failures. There have been a lot of failures in the waste-to-energy plants, and that's probably not putting emphasis on the right technology to manage that waste has been one of the primary reasons for these failures.
Brilliant. I think one of the things that you touched upon very briefly was really the role of that technology has to play. So my next question is really about that. So how can superior engineering and purposeful design really support the transition from waste management to resource management with infrastructure that creates value at every single stage? How does the systems thinking approach at Rampol really guide this particular transition?
I could have, say, 5 different points to answer this. The first thing is always at the start, which is the design phase. We need to have a design with the guiding principle of minimizing the waste that's going to the landfill. So if you're looking at a city, municipality level, we need to have composting sites, recycling sites, waste to energy, waste to renewable natural gas. So, anaerobic digesters. So that way, instead of having a mixed waste going to a landfill, and you've seen how the waste get transported in India to a landfill, there's a lot of loss on the way from the waste segregation. So designing something where we have the infrastructure in place, where we try to minimize the waste that's either getting lost in the process or going to the landfill. The second is getting some, advancement in technologies. I know I did mention about not importing, but we can definitely look at some of the things that can be replicated, like advanced material recovery facilities. It can be implemented. Look at, getting those latest state of the art when it comes to material recovery facilities. The other thing is what we usually try to do is build a life cycle assessment into the waste management infrastructure that we are, going to recommend for the particular client, so that the net negative impact on basically, trying to make it more carbon neutral or even sometimes carbon positive, we call the embedded carbon, the operational carbon. The second is building a modular, what we usually see in India, whether it's the infrastructure, anything, by the time we design, we built it for say 100 million, vehicles on, for a particular road. By the time it's built, the demand is already 150 million. So we need to ensure that we are building plants on waste to energy, which can be modular in nature. 5 tons, okay, it's increased to 5 tons, I can just add another 5 tons of it. So that modularity needs to be there. The other thing, we usually talk about is the technology. Again, I already touched upon it. We cannot really, just replicate what's happening. As Rampol, I'm not sure whether you've seen the Copenhagen. If any of you have visited to Copenhagen, there is a waste to energy plant, and it also has a ski slope. We call it the ski slope. So if you go into winters, you'll see people skiing on that, and you'll never come to know it's a waste to energy plant. That's how clean a waste to energy plant can be. So that's something. And the other key factor that we usually, tend to ignore is the community and the stakeholder consultation. Whenever you're building a waste to energy or, a waste to RNG plant or anaerobic digester, because digesters, these plants have odor issues. Some issues where, it can cause community nuisance. So getting them on board, telling them, getting those stakeholder communications across that this is something going to benefit you in the long term, that also helps in ensuring that the capital investment that I'm going to make is not going to go, the project stalled. We have seen, we have seen instances in Kerala, other states where the foundation stone is laid, but because of community protests, the plans have never taken care of because those community engagement, stakeholder engagement activities didn't happen when the project was getting planned.
Sure. It's actually quite fascinating. I think this is one thing that we were just connecting on before the event started. This viral video about the ski slope in Denmark. I mean, the first thing that we think about waste to energy plants, we don't really imagine that we'll have communities and children playing around those particular plants, where in this particular case, they have a ski slope right onto the building itself. I would really urge everyone to have a look at that video. Down to our last question. Really, in your opinion, what are the policy reforms and mechanisms that are needed to accelerate investment and innovation in the waste to wealth ecosystem?
So we already have, a few policies in place. It's called the SETAT program from the Ministry of Transport, where it's the sustainable transport fuel, where there is a framework. If I were to generate what we call a renewable natural gas from wet waste from our anaerobic digesters, I can sell it into the market. We definitely need more. We need the financial incentives, tax breaks, these other, for me to come set up a plant, and where we know, it's a new thing, so we definitely need some more financial incentives. The investment, right now we do see the investment, I'm talking about both investment in technology, R&D, and the actual capital investment. So the first, when you talk about the investment in research and development technology, we need those investments, as I talked about the incubators. So in the IITs, we set up incubators where we come up with indigenous technologies for managing the waste. And the second thing is, talking about the financial investment. We do see PEs, VCs, they're lining up for the renewables, the solars, lining up for renewables, the sectors where they see the returns. But trust me, the waste also has good returns. We need the investments because I have seen, based on my experience, the waste to energy or these plants are failing because of the technology has not been appropriate. Some of the plants have been, able to make changes to the technology and move on. So those investments, if it's coming from international IFIs, PEs, they ensure that they are investing, the technology is solid, because ultimately for them, they're not doing it for charity, they need it for the returns of the investment. So that will ensure that the right technology is there. And then again, talking about the awareness programs that I mentioned earlier, so that awareness has to be built. Waste is really a wealth, it's not a waste. You can convert into a wealth. If that message gets driven, all of us start working towards it, we'll definitely see a day, where, waste is definitely will be a wealth.
Thank you so much, Sunil. That was pretty much a last question, just to wrap things up in a quick 30 seconds. So very clearly this technology is here to stay. Clear, predictable policy, standards that reward circular design and financing that values life cycle performance is really what we need as enablers. Now that they're apart, I think the few things that we really need this technology to do is to be cleaner, more efficient, and more importantly, be kinder to the communities and the environment that it touches. With that, let's wrap things up. Thank you so much.